G'day mate, 40 here. So there's a little kerfuffle on the platform X. Chris Brunet was a writer for the Daily Caller, and so there have been a lot of alt-right edgelords whose day job was writing for the Daily Caller, and he got fired from the Daily Caller. According to Nathan Columnist, it was for antisocial behavior, and he won a fellowship from the establishment center-right Manhattan Institute that employs Heather McDonald, but it's very much a racially blind institute. It doesn't want to talk about group differences. And now Chris Brunet has come out as Groyper friendly, Groyper curious, Nick Fuentes curious. And so this is a young man who's had considerable success within establishment conservatism, seeming to increasingly throw in his lot with Nick Fuentes. And so there are some brave dissident thinkers, but overwhelmingly they seem to be people who've lost touch with reality and thrown in with a low IQ crowd. So if you're a smart person and you choose to throw in with Nick Fuentes and the Groyper crowd, you're exhibiting a level of self-destruction that's off the charts. And Columnist had a couple of tweets analyzing Chris Brunet and what can be learned from it. He talked about if you're part of any organization or community, you're going to learn some embarrassing information about that community. Right? There's no community that doesn't have its embarrassing side. But if you want to stay a member of the community, you don't spill the tea. And Chris Brunet is intent on spilling the tea on the conservative movement. So it could be entertaining. It's a good test, right? When do you spill the tea on your own? And it depends on your personality and your role. So if your role is primarily as a reporter or as an analyst, then you're going to spill the tea much more than if you're an activist or an apparatchik or just trying to promote the party's interests. So I deliberately optimize for truth. That means I'm going to be much more willing to spill the tea than those who are just fighting on behalf of Donald Trump and America first. To me, the most important thing is the truth. And when Donald Trump says things that are not true, I'm going to say Donald Trump is saying things that are not true. When Republicans say things that are stupid, such as Kamala Harris bears considerable responsibilities for the past 3.5 years of Joe Biden's presidency, I'm going to say that's not true because the office of the vice president doesn't have any power independent of the president except for the power to invoke the 25th Amendment. And if you can get half of the cabinet to agree that the president is unfit for office, then the vice president can lead that movement to declare the president unfit for office and remove him from office. But other than that, it's been Joe Biden and the people he's handled who've made the decisions. Kamala Harris has worked for Joe Biden just as an employee works for an employer, but that does not make you responsible for the policies of your employer. And it's a convenient and rhetorically convincing argument that Kamala Harris bears considerable responsibility for the Biden administration. And it's convenient and a handy rhetorical argument to say that Kamala was the border czar and look what a disaster legal immigration has been for this country under Joe Biden. But no matter how many news outlets and no matter how many officials, no matter if God himself were to come down to earth and declare Kamala Harris was the border czar, under Joe Biden, that doesn't mean that she ever had the power that comes with a title like border czar. She never had any independent power to pass policy with regard to immigration and legal immigration and enforcement of the rules and strengthening our borders. So there was never truth behind the title border czar. And truth is not established by the number of outlets that declare you X. Right? You can declare yourself X. You can have the President of the United States. You can have the most trusted members of the elite and the news media declare that you are X. But if you are not X, you're not X, no matter how many people say you are. Right? Truth is not established by people in power declaring it. Right? Truth is established because it's empirically verifiable, and you can test it. And the truth should have analytical and predictive power. So Kamala Harris was called the border czar, but she never was the border czar because she never had any independent power. So it's a bogus grounds to attack her, but it's rhetorically effective. Okay, this is what surprised me the most this morning. Patrick Healy, who's center-left, he's gay, he's a long-time New York Times journalist, moved into the editor side, and he has a column out this morning why Trump is going to do better than expected at this election. And he made a lot of convincing points. I read them and go, oh yeah, that's a good point. So point number one, why is the Trump campaign running all these transgender ads, right? All these ads noting that Kamala Harris wanted the state to pay for elective transgender surgeries for illegal immigrants because they're incredibly effective. And from the perspective of Patrick Healy and of liberals and of the elite and the mainstream media, what Trump is doing is sowing anxiety and fear, and that's bad. It would apparently be much more elevated if Trump ran on something like hope and change, as Barack Obama did in 2008. But when the country is confronting real peril, there's absolutely nothing wrong with running on fear and anxiety. And noting that Kamala Harris favors the state paying for incredibly expensive transgender surgery, which is then inevitably followed by expensive medical care. That's one reason that many medical professionals love transgender surgery, is because it needs a lot of expensive follow-up care. It's a great moneymaker for doctors and hospitals, and it's a great drain on the public purse if we start providing transgender transition surgery for prisoners and illegal aliens. It's the most crazy thing, and it's attention grabbing. It makes you realize how far out of the mainstream Kamala Harris is, and she hasn't disavowed it. She hasn't clearly disavowed any of her earlier, more left-wing policy proposals that she ran on in 2019. And she hasn't provided any explanation about why her campaign says that her position is different now from then. But it just grabs your attention. It does provoke anxiety and fear that someone that radical could be president of the United States. Kamala Harris, make no mistake, would be the most left-wing president in American history. She's far more left-wing than Barack Obama. Certainly Hillary Clinton. She is more left-wing than Bernie Sanders. She's more left-wing than Elizabeth Warren. Right? She will be the most left-wing American president ever, just based on her votes as a United States Senator from California. And these Trump ads have been highly effective, even though the media says, oh, they're just sowing fear and anxiety. Well, there's a time and a place, and there are situations where it's absolutely appropriate to try to get people to increase their level of fear. Hey, we got turkey in the house. Now, is Kamala sunk It's interesting that Kamala pronounces her name differently than all the Kamalas on the Indian subcontinent. Jim Garrity has a thoughtful and long profile of Kamala Harris in National Review today, and he notes that Kamala Harris has been underestimated her entire political life. So throughout her life, people have dismissed her as some kind of sex kitten, some kind of user, manipulator, empty-headed. But while she is quite awkward giving interviews and speeches, apparently, like Hillary Clinton, she shines in small groups where she has considerable presence and charisma and is able to enlist all sorts of powerful people willing to work for her. And so when Kamala Harris first ran for political office as the district attorney of San Francisco, she was underestimated. When she decided to run for Attorney General of California, she was underestimated. And so Jim Garrity says Kamala has a long history of being underestimated. We shouldn't underestimate her this time round, even though it appears to me that Donald Trump is in a very good position to win. So back to the Patrick Healy article, which was the most interesting article that I've read today. The Jim Garrity profile of Kamala Harris was the second most interesting article I've read today. Patrick Healy says that he doubts that undecided voters really undecided. They're just people who are going to vote for Donald Trump, but don't want to admit it publicly. They don't want to admit it to pollsters. They don't want to admit it to friends and family. They may not even want to admit it to themselves. But undecideds who vote on the economy and on immigration and matters of national security, crime, and safety are going to overwhelmingly break for And so Donald Trump has beaten the polls in both the 2016 and the 2020 elections. Private polls show him 1 to 3 points in a stronger position than public polls in the battleground states. And Mark Halperin was saying this 6 weeks ago, that many political operatives in the Republican Party are convinced that the undecideds are going to break for Donald Trump, because these are people who are going to vote Trump, but are just a little embarrassed to say they're going to vote for Donald Trump. Because Trump does say and do a lot of things that are embarrassing. And there are many social circles and communities and professions, educational institutions, communities, churches, synagogues, where you would be regarded as a whack job if you came out in support of Donald Trump. And so Patrick Healy's analysis is that the undecided vote is really overwhelmingly a Trump vote. And this explains why Republican political professionals have been so convinced for at least 6 weeks, according to Mark Halperin, that the undecideds, particularly them, are going to break for Donald Trump. Healy also makes the point that Kamala Harris has never presented an effective and appealing economic platform. And so the economy is going to be the most likely basis on which people cast their votes. And Kamala has just failed to convince people of her competency in the economic realm. And Kamala's running with so many different messages. It's interesting that she's not putting a priority on the one issue that is most concerned to voters, and that's the economy. Why isn't Kamala stressing the economy in her speeches? Why isn't it the economy the focus of her advertising? Because she's not convincing undecideds that she'll be a good steward of the economy. Right? She's had 3 months as the Democratic nominee. She's had 3 months to make her case. And she just hasn't made it on the most important area, the economy. And so why is Kamala choosing instead to run on how awful and scary Donald Trump is? Because she recognizes that she's not landing her arguments with the economy. Right? If her arguments about how she would more effectively manage the economy were landing, then that's what she'd be talking about, and that would be the focus of her ads. But she has failed to move people. A lot of people are Kamala curious because they don't want to vote for Donald Trump. And they've been wide open for 3 months for her to come along and make an argument to convince them. And she's just completely failed to do so. And it's now, 3 months today that Kamala has been the Democratic nominee for president. Churches against Trump, you sure about that? Yeah, mainstream Protestant churches are generally on the left. So Pentecostal Christians, evangelical Christians, traditional Christians, right-wing Christians are obviously going to vote heavily for Trump. Orthodox Jews will vote for Trump 3-1. But Reform and Conservative will likely vote for Kamala 4-1. And mainstream Protestants will vote for Kamala, because these organizations that are called mainstream, but they've been captured by the left since at least the 1960s. Fourth most interesting article I read this morning in the New York Times, talking about Donald Trump, the bro whisperer, that he's mounted a highly effective campaign recruiting young men to his cause and may very well recruit them to the Republican Party for many years going forward. So young men often see a world that's rigged against them, with diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, with an educational establishment seemingly intent on making them ever more compliant and more female in their behavior, and young men are rebelling, and they are embracing Donald Trump in never before seen numbers. So usually young people vote heavily for the Democratic Party. For the first time, we're likely to see a strong majority of young men voting for Donald Trump, and it has the makings of a permanent realignment. That when you go through a normal public education, right, it is slanted so heavily in favor of female priorities. For example, you don't tend to study military strategy in grade school. You don't tend to have classes that appeal to boys. That male behavior, seeking adventure and challenge and risk and competition tends to be frowned upon by the feminist-dominated public education complex. And young men are vibrating with Donald Trump's message and with Elon Musk. Right? Elon Musk is presenting some exciting challenges, such as going to Mars, space travel. And they hear Elon Musk articulating how difficult it is to deal with mind-numbing levels of government bureaucracy to get things done. And young men are less likely than girls to just color within the lines. Right? To be a male is to be more assertive, to be more aggressive, to be more challenging, to be less willing to be stultified and regimented, and to just be nice and sit in your chair and do what you're told. Right? It's more of a model that appeals to girls rather than boys. And so Elon Musk has become a formidable personality, fighting on behalf of not just Donald Trump, but articulating any of the hopes and dreams, aspirations, struggles, fears, and anxieties of young men in general. And it's not at all clear that the Democrats have any plan to win back young men. So Donald Trump recognized after the Supreme Court's abortion ruling that he was going to lose a significant number of votes with particularly single women over the abortion issue. And so he pivoted to raking up as many votes as he can from young men, which is why he's gone on so many male-focused podcasts. third most interesting story that I read today was in National Review, and it was about an article in the New Yorker by an editor of the New Yorker saying that political violence is a public health problem. And so have you noticed when you go to the doctor, you get asked all sorts of new questions these days, such as, do you have a gun in the home? And so public health wants to take over more and more of life. Public health is dominated by the left. And so if you can treat more and more of life and of the political as really a public health matter that should be run by technocrats, right? Highly educated left-wing technocrats who proclaim they're just following the data, right? There's this ever-growing expansion of public health into more and more of life. So gun ownership has become a matter of public health. Inequity has become a matter of public health. Diversity, equity, inclusion has become a matter of public health. Racism has become a matter of public health. Misogyny, like hurtful social media commentary has become a matter of public health. It's all a way of arrogating to itself, to this domain that's dominated by the left, more and more power, and remove the political from the political and turn it over to the realm of experts. So when things are in the realm of the political, we can argue about them. But when topics are considered more appropriately belonging to experts, right, then public sentiment plays less and less of a role. So one reason that American politics is so rowdy and rambunctious compared to politics in Europe is that the people have much more of a voice in the United States. We have a First Amendment, we have far more freedom of speech, while in Europe, much more of the political is turned over to the experts, while in the United States, citizens have much more of an opportunity to shape the functions of government. But our expert class and our public health officers and our elites want to make our government and our society more and more like Europe, where experts run things. And in Europe, this goes back to the days of the monarchy, where you had a monarch and his courtiers and his experts who would rule society. And the United States rebelled against that and had a revolution to institute the rule of the people. So in the news media and among elites, you hear all these comments about how Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, but you never hear it pointed out, except in conservative media, that public health authorities are a threat to democracy, that the rule of experts is a threat to democracy, that removing more and more of political controversies and turning them over to technocrats to decide is a war on democracy. And I'm not someone who thinks that more and more democracy is automatically a good thing. I'm not someone who thinks that rule by experts is automatically bad. I'm not someone who thinks that wisdom resides in the people. I think sometimes the people are right, sometimes the experts are right. Sometimes there's a case for more democracy, other times there's a case for less democracy. Situations change. So where a wide open democracy might seem to be the best system in one situation, then under time of grave peril, right, some kind of xenophobic police state may be your nation's best bet for survival. There's no one simple answer to life. Still trying to figure out when Kamala got elected to be the leader of the Democrats and their representatives. Well, overwhelmingly, Democrats decided that Joe Biden was not fit to run for another term. And so Kamala was simply at the right place. It's a bit like the theory, why do men marry a particular woman? Because when they decide to settle down, that's the woman who's around and available. Europe has more democracy for sure. In which ways? American politics is just a popularity contest. Well, saying something's a popularity contest, you're saying then that American politics is more democratic. Rule has always been by technocracies, says the chat. Well, experts have always had an outsized influence, but now expertise has become so specialized and developed that regular people can't even understand what experts are talking about and the basis on which experts make their recommendations. And the threat of the rule of experts to democracy is something that gets almost no coverage in the news media, except occasionally from conservative and libertarian writers. So Mark Halperin's morning show was back this morning. He didn't do anything over the weekend, so no evidence that Trump's momentum has stalled. I think those photos of Trump in the McDonald's were iconic. All right, they just grabbed your attention. And so whether or not Kamala Harris worked at a McDonald's, as she alleges and as one of her friends from that time period says is true, it was a funny troll that created an attention-grabbing photographic and video moment. And you also saw Donald Trump's skill with people on display. Like, Donald Trump is at ease with people. People enjoy being around Donald Trump. Right, he's good at reading people. So you saw on the Ali G show that Donald Trump read through the setup and the scam right away. Like, he knew what was going on. He was good at reading people. And people get energy from hanging out with Donald Trump because he gets them. He reads them well. He reads the crowd well. And he will adjust often his speech to what's going on with the crowd. He will do a lot of A/B testing in his speeches, seeing which lines work. And he made Build the Wall cornerstone of his 2016 presidential campaign because he noted the enthusiastic response it got from crowds. So Kamala is very good with people like herself, elites. She's excellent with donors. She's excellent with media and Hollywood elites and fundraising elites. But she doesn't seem to have much of a touch with regular people. So Republicans used to be the party of the country club. Now they're increasingly the party of the working class. And you saw that with Trump's appearance at McDonald's and how he just fit right into that scene. Something like 70% of Americans will eat at a McDonald's at least once in a year. Now, I don't know what it means, but on Mark Halperin's morning show, it's become increasingly difficult to find people who will say they're voting for Kamala Harris. So the people who populate Mark Halperin's show tend to be an elite audience. And Halperin, the host, he has to reach and make all sorts of special efforts to try to find people who are willing to make the case for Kamala Harris. And the Democratic consultant on the show is striking for his honesty, right? I think he has surprised me by how willing he has been to criticize Kamala Harris. And Sean Spicer, the Republican representative, he bugs me on the show because he talks too much and he's overly combative. Right? Halperin, the host, is nice, and the Democrat consultant Dan is quite a nice bloke. And then Sean Spicer stands out for his Irish feistiness. and he just talks way too much, interrupts, filibusters, goes on and on. But Dan, the Democratic consultant on Halperin's show, keeps talking about how Democrats are not landing with their messages on the economy, and that Kamala is not nailing her interviews. And she seems to do worse with the softest interview, such as going on The View. And by failing to articulate how she would do things differently from Joe Biden, she seems to be failing to win over possible undecided voters, because overwhelmingly American people feel like the United States is headed in a bad direction. They want to change direction. And if Kamala Harris can't articulate how she would do things differently from Joe Biden, then she is not in line with the majority American opinion. Two-party system feels non-democratic. Why so? I'm not an American, but if I were, I'd be voting for anyone apparently not taking the AIPAC dollars. I wonder how significant Israel's victories have been over the past month for the American election. Because you see increasingly over the past 2 months, Bibi Netanyahu has been willing to push the Biden administration. He's been willing to do more and more things against the wishes of the Biden administration, and he has demonstrated considerable success. Almost all of Israel's stunning achievements in war have come explicitly against the directions of the Biden administration, pointing out just what a disaster Joe Biden has been on foreign policy. I would think that this would have to work in favor of Donald Trump's electoral chances. Now Israel's taken out Hezbollah's banking system. They don't seem to lack for targets for their air force. So their ground invasion of Lebanon is supposed to wrap up in about another 5 weeks. And they're just going to leave it to the Air Force to do the rest. And we're just waiting for the massive attack on Iran. Apparently there's a second U.S. anti-ballistic missile battery going to arrive in Israel soon. And so when that's set up within the next few days, that would allow Israel to begin launching its attacks on Iran. Israel is expecting Iran to retaliate with a ballistic missile barrage. Israel's got its air defenses in order now after considerable help from America. So if Israel goes after the Iranian National Guard, goes after the forces of repression in that country, that'll create much more openness for some kind of regime change and opposition movement to rise up in Iran. The chat says more people than ever are talking about Zionism and Israel. So Zionism is simply Jewish nationalism. And when a country assertively protects its interests, it will likely step on a lot of toes, but it will also create a lot of respect, as opposed to, say, a man who just constantly gives in to the whims of his woman, right? It will temporarily make his life easier, but he'll just be seen as a pushover, and he will fail to develop respect from her and from other people. So Israel has shown it's no longer such a pushover. And given that all nation states must make their highest priority their survival, right, they will have a natural respect for the effective way that Israel is pursuing its national interest. And Israel's strategy and successful strikes will be widely studied in the battle against terrorism. So it's interesting how Sinwar had a United Nations card identifying himself as I think a teacher for United Nations agencies. So the United Nations has long been dominated by the forces of anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, anti-settler ideology. In other words, the pro-terror, anti-white countries have long made up an overwhelming majority of United Nations countries. And so the UN has long been quite hospitable to these third world terrorists. And UNIFIL, the United Nations peacekeepers, apparently been successfully bought off and bribed by Hezbollah. So Hezbollah's been able to do whatever it wanted in southern Lebanon, and they bought the cooperation of UNIFIL. And that's the main reason why UNIFIL doesn't want to leave southern Lebanon, is because when it does so, it will be shown how Hezbollah subverted them and used them for their own interests. Just as Egypt was particularly vociferous about Israel not invading Rafah, because when Israel invaded Rafah, it was shown how Egypt had allowed in vast numbers of armaments to Hamas, that it was either with the active cooperation of Egyptian authorities or the Egyptian border guards were all successfully bribed by Hamas. And so Egypt's considerable role in allowing Hamas to amass an arsenal that allowed Hamas to have such a devastating attack on Israel October 7, 2023, right, that would never have happened without active cooperation from Egyptian border guards. And that's why Egypt was appalled that Israel would enter Rafah, because then Egypt's horrible behavior would be revealed to the world, and that'd be incredibly embarrassing. And while most of the Sunni Arab nations are on board with Israel attacking Iran, attacking Hezbollah, attacking the Houthis, attacking Hamas, right, many leading Egyptians are speaking out in favor of Hamas and the terror regime funded and directed by Iran. And so Israel has requested that UNIFIL remove its forces from southern Lebanon. UNIFIL, the United Nations peacekeeping, so-called peacekeeping group, won't leave, because if they do leave, the full extent of their active cooperation with the Hezbollah terrorists will be revealed. And good on Israel for designating various UN agencies as active terror agencies, because terrorists have frequently used their identification and used their jobs with UN agencies as their polite cover for their terror operations.